Our heroes quickened their step, paying no attention to the questions of these novice players. One of those present in the square suspected our hero of committing a crime before he entered the tower. In fact, he believes there have been many instances of people going to this place to hide from justice. Our hero was well aware of the rumors that had risen. In the tower, many people hide their identity. He's sure he was able to get their attention with a wave of monsters and a goblin mask. The young man then commanded Vulcan that they should move on because they still had a lot to do. A moment later, they dissolved and disappeared, regardless of the cheers and shouts behind them that came from that crowd. All three immediately found themselves on the second floor in a small forest, and the system greeted them. Also, they should have completed the current quest before moving on to the next floor. It was necessary to fight the kobolds again, as well as defeat the kobold warriors. Throwing off his hood, the young man was sure they could handle anything now. He was preparing for another battle. Our hero ordered Vulcan to take up the task. He's been tasked with bringing all these kobolds here alive. If he wanted, he could take Haru with him. Our hero wanted to experiment with demonic energy and asked his servant to return as soon as possible. Already flying away, the Vulcan shouted loudly for him and dared not use his new power until he returned. He was intrigued. The girl asked the young man if it was possible to do the task in this manner, sending someone in his place. But he, exhaling deeply, replied that if she wanted, she could go off on her own to catch all those kobolds. He's not forcing it. After that, the protagonist got ready to practice with his new ring. The young man still couldn't believe that he could use demonic energy, but he was very curious to see what would come of it all. In the next second, he activated the ring, and huge streams of demonic energy began to fly in all directions. It was a special energy that belonged to one of the most powerful races. A small clot of purple color appeared in front of him. This was the very magical energy he wanted to try out. Suddenly, the girl warned our hero that a ferocious kobold had appeared in the bushes, ready to attack them. Without wasting any time, this monster rushed straight at our hero, much to his delight, because in the next second, the young man activated his ring and decided to try out his new power on this creature. He sent a stream of demonic energy straight into that kobold, but it seemed that the monster managed to dodge, much to the girl's surprise. However, the young man was certain that this was not the case, because a blow that strong simply couldn't help but do some damage. And in the next instant, the shoulder of this kobold, to his surprise, began to fall apart into small pieces, as if it had been frozen by liquid nitrogen. The girl couldn't believe her eyes. She didn't understand what was even going on here. Our hero cheerfully replied that demonic energy was a weapon that was incredibly powerful. Not everyone can withstand such an attack. In a moment, there was no trace of the kobold. The young man added that this happens to those who encounter such a powerful energy flow for the first time. It was inevitable, he said, but there was something else he wanted to do. He decided to put that energy and his spiritual powers to the test in creating a special soldier. In his opinion, it should have turned out to be an incredibly strong warrior. He combined two streams of energy, his soul and demonic energy. But in the next second, the combination began to tear him apart, and the energy was so strong he could barely stand and fight back. He decided to lower the energy density from 10 units to 1. And after a while, white glowing eyes began to emerge from this huge purple blob of energy that resembled the former kobold, but much stronger. To our hero's delight, he realized that his properly chosen proportion had worked perfectly and he had created an incredibly strong soldier. The girl rejoiced and praised him. I think he's got it now. But from the looks of it, it wasn't very easy. Our hero replied that on the contrary, it was too easy. After all, few people know how to control that kind of energy except demons. No one really knows how easy it was to actually use it. Meanwhile, Vulcan returned and marveled at what he saw before his eyes. Was it really created with demonic energy? He asked our hero. He was able to bring for our warrior a large number of live kobolds that were bound with ropes and sat obediently on the ground awaiting their fate. Vulcan continued to marvel at his master's abilities. After all, a spiritual soldier with demonic energy is honored to be called a demonic spiritual soldier. That expression seemed to please our hero, while Vulcan scrutinized his new soldier very closely. He continued to praise our hero, calling him his disciple. But in his mind, the protagonist thought that it was too difficult to use his energy every time he captured a soul. There seemed to be a different way to put those skills to use in combat. He looked at Vulcan and realized that in this case he didn't need to summon souls himself, as his servant was much better at it. He turned to him with a smile and said that Vulcan had far more experience in summoning souls than he did. His words made Vulcan blush with embarrassment. He was delighted at such compliments. At last he waited for his student to pay homage to his teacher. The young man was glad because Vulcan was able to both summon souls and command them during battle, which is quite valuable. But in the next second, Vulcan suddenly felt the manifestation of demonic energy on himself and cried out loudly, because our hero activated his ring and directed this flow directly into the center of his servant's chest. The young man looked at him happily and loudly said that if he filled his soul with demonic energy, the fighters he would summon would have to turn into spiritual demonic soldiers. After all, his soul is much stronger than Kobold's, so our hero uses all the energy he has. A second later, a huge stream of demonic energy began to sweep through Vulcan, who was screaming loudly and uttering our hero's name, cursing him with every possible word. The girl watched from the side and was frightened, for it seemed to her that Vulcan would probably perish from such a powerful flow. But our hero assured her that the spiritual master would endure and stay alive. Meanwhile, Vulcan shouted in a demonic voice that if he survived, he would surely tear our hero to pieces and eat him for breakfast. The young man replied to him that in that case Vulcan should get to his level before committing what he had planned. If he becomes strong enough, only then will he be able to challenge him. He'll be very happy about it. After a moment, the incredible streams of energy began to intensify their rotation, and huge beams of light spread out in all directions. Seconds later, Vulcan appeared in a new form, much stronger and brighter than he had been before. To the delight of our hero, who realized that in front of him was his best spiritual soldier, namely Vulcan. But suddenly his servant announced in a quiet voice that his apprentice had made a mistake because he had created a being many times stronger than himself. Whereupon Vulcan laughed loudly and summoned all his spirit soldiers, who seemed about to attack our hero. But the necromancer was ready for it and applied his new goblin mask, because he realized that now he had a great chance to fight an equal opponent in strength. Vulcan shouted joyfully and loudly that he would now show him the soldiers he had longed to see, after which released a huge amount of these terrifying monsters. He commanded them to fly forward and attack our hero. But it seems that the young man was ready for their attack because he was wearing this amazing mask. The girl was delighted by his behavior because she realized that he had now activated her. He was able, thanks to his mask, to watch as the demonic spirit soldiers moved much slower than him. So he had a chance to attack them and disarm them. Maybe it's just his imagination. Or it turns out that the girl might have seen things that way before, thanks to her mask. However, in the next second, our hero destroyed each of these spirit soldiers with swift blows, and the next second pounced on Vulcan to his great surprise. He struck him a powerful blow with his fist and stated that he was different now, though he had been called the Death Star before. The blow landed directly on Vulcan's head, who in the next instant fell to the ground with a huge rumble, even though he was a spiritual master. Removing his mask from his face, the young man told him in a still demonic voice that Vulcan should have calmed down and listened to his orders. After a while, when the dust and smoke had cleared after this blow, Vulcan uttered that he was rather hurt because it still hurt a lot after such a blow. The young man assured him that the attack that failed only worked on normal people, but now he wasn't just a person, but had hidden powers using that mask. The girl turned again to our hero, for she was extremely surprised. It seems her little brother had once again used the power of that mask. The young man replied that he had done just that, used the power of the goblin mask, because everything around him abruptly slowed down and seemed very slow, and it was as if he had become the most powerful fighter. But suddenly she interrupted him and said that it was just a side effect due to lack of experience. Her words angered him somewhat. How is that a side effect? He was just counting on her unique ability to slow down everything that was going on around her. The young man then asked her what the mask was for in that case. Haru replied to him that she had said earlier that the mask was needed for battle foresight, that is, to predict your opponent's strikes. With it, you can see the enemy's slowed actions and anticipate his next move. He immediately began to ask her in more detail how he could learn it, but she couldn't answer, because according to her she just took it and did it, and it worked itself out. Our hero smirked and realized that it seemed that this girl was considered a true genius even among goblins. It would be hard for her to train him, even if he asked her to. Haru interrupted his thoughts and asked the young man if he happened to be dizzy. He shook his head negatively. The thing was that if an inexperienced goblin used a special skill, he would experience a terrible headache or dizziness. It also applies to her. She can't use Providence whenever she wants. She was very worried about our hero, but he didn't seem to be able to activate that skill when he first wore that mask. Nevertheless, the girl believed that he would soon learn everything and be more deft with this valuable object. He thanked his friend for telling him how the item should actually be used. The whole time they were talking, Vulcan was sitting off to the side, feeling very sad. Suddenly, he was approached by our young attractive lady who seemed to want to take pity on him. After all, Haru understood his sad feelings and emotions. Vulcan immediately started hugging her and thanking her because she was the only one who took care of him in any way, unlike his idiot master. Quite unexpectedly, the girl said. She hadn't even thought of even that to praise him or cheer him up in any way. She merely wanted to let him know that more kobolds were needed to be brought in. After all, the protagonist asked for another one as soon as possible, and it must be done before he turns Vulcan's soul into a ball and consumes it. Those were his words. That is the words of our hero. After she was done, Vulcan was very upset because he had to do his lord's bidding once again. After a while, the system notified the young warrior that the mission was accomplished and he could successfully continue onward. Now that they had a new fine-tuned process, they continued to mop up one floor after another. The third floor was cleared. After a while, they were able to clear the fourth floor as well. In these ongoing duels, our hero used his ring and mask, while the girl aided him in his battles with her swift sword. However, her strange demonic smile was very disturbing. After a while, on the fifth floor, two warriors were having a conversation amongst themselves. Everyone was talking about some guy who called himself Ghost Mask. It seemed like it had already been 3 days since he had entered the forest on this floor. One of the warriors was well aware that after the fifth floor, the kind of monsters that would be difficult to deal with began because they were goblins with poison needles. And at this time, our hero, being in the forest, activated his magical abilities and expected some monster to attack him. The next second, one of these monsters exhaled a special poisoned arrow from its tube, which flew in the direction of our hero. But she didn't have time to reach her goal, because the next second she was stopped by the swift sword of our beauty. The girl looked at this monster with her demonic gaze and asked him why he dared to attack her little brother. Her words caused that goblin to be extremely afraid, but a moment later, the Vulcan spiritual warriors attacked the creature and instantly destroyed it. Vulcan praised the girl. She seems to have stopped that arrow just in time, because it was just about to hit our hero. But as she spoke, Vulcan noticed something odd. There was clearly something wrong here. Her wicked smile and demeanor seemed very suspicious. What the hell is going on here? It was a very frightening phenomenon, and Vulcan was frightened.